And I want to thank you for coming today. This is going to be an extremely educational program. I thought I was pretty well versed until I met with Kim, who is extremely passionate. But this issue is difficult to discuss, and it also has a lot of misinformation around it. And if you enjoyed this and you think other people might like it, it will be on our website within a day or two. We do ask that you turn off all your electronic devices and phones. We are recording this, as I said, and the video will be posted on the League's website. The videos are copyrighted and unauthorized recordings are prohibited. Please contact us for permission to use any or all of this copyrighted recording. So we are delighted to have experts on this panel who are our own League members. Kim is currently working in Denver as a perinatal nurse practitioner. She is a graduate of Buena Vista High School, attended CU and graduated with her bachelor's in nursing, worked for as an RN for 17 years. She wasn't busy enough, so she went back and got her master's in nursing from Regis and has been working as a women's health nurse practitioner for the last 22 years in Denver hospitals. Ellen is a volunteer for Coloradans for Reproductive Freedom, and she spent 30 years working on U.S. foreign and domestic policy issues related to the health and rights of women and youth. She developed and managed the public-private Colorado initiative to reduce unintended pregnancies. Ellen has expertise in issues associated with domestic and international sexual and reproductive health and rights and U.S. government policy. She served as the program officer for Women and Population at the United Nations Foundation. She oversaw the U.S. Department of State Office of Population during significant international negotiations related to sexual and reproductive rights and health, and has worked on Capitol Hill. So we have very impressive panelists. Please hold your questions till the end. If you want a note card and pen to make notes or write a question, just raise your hand and we'll get those to you. And I want to welcome, Kim is going first, I believe. All right, thank you.
Hello, thank you for coming. Today I'm going to talk about a small part of reproductive health, a very important part, and a part that has a lot of ambiguity with it. I'm going to go over some history that I found interesting about contraception, abortion, a lot of different things that I think were interesting, some genetic testing, and I hope when you leave here you'll have a better understanding of the abortion issue and some reproductive health and go with better knowledge than you came with. So what is reproductive rights, reproductive freedom? Well, in my mind, it's the right for a woman to make her own decision about contraception, birth control, pregnancy, and abortion. I would assume that you'll probably agree with me that in this American country, as Americans, we have a pretty strong opinion about our rights, our right to freedom of speech, our right to bear arms, our right to make healthcare choices for ourselves, especially since the pandemic and after. Sadly, I think that because of the pandemic, there's a lot of mistrust, and I'm going to have to signal to my husband because we don't have a thing to switch the thing. So there's a lot of mistrust in the healthcare system. I found this quote and it spoke to me. I think there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of conspiracy theories out there. The way we are able to get our information on the internet, I would say everything you read on the internet, take with a grain of salt, with a huge amount of skepticism, until proven otherwise. Because as you know, my Uncle Bob's coworker John told him that this happened and you can put it on the internet and that's the gospel truth. And so please recognize that everything you read on the internet is not true. From a medical standpoint, when we make medical decisions, we look at randomized controlled studies. We look at science. We look at the research that's been going on for years to make our decisions. I hope after you leave today, as I said, you'll have a little better knowledge and understanding of the abortion issue. It is a hard issue to talk about. Go ahead. So how am I an expert? As Karen was saying, Karen and Margie were my teachers when I graduated from Buena Vista High School just a few years ago. I don't know if that makes you feel old or me feel old. But I did graduate from CU, and then I worked out on labor and delivery in Denver. I went to school in Boulder and met my husband, and he was from Denver, so we made our careers there. And that's him sitting right here in the front, if you see me pointing at him. So I worked as a labor and delivery nurse for 17 years. I then went back, got my master's, worked in private practice as a women's health nurse practitioner in a private practice with OBGYNs, obstetrician gynecologists. So I did that for 6 years, where I did PAPs and annuals, new OB appointments, postpartum checks, gynecological care. I then was kind of missing the excitement of labor and delivery, got a job offer to work for this perinatal group, did a 6-month training to become a perinatal nurse practitioner. I'm sure you're all going, what does that mean? Well, perinatal medicine is high-risk OB, so high-risk pregnancy. So these doctors are obstetricians that do their 4-year residency after they go to medical school, and then they do an additional 3-year fellowship for high-risk pregnancy. So I did 6 months training, and now my title is perinatal nurse practitioner. My degree is as a women's health, and I've been doing that for, it'll be 17 years in September. So for 40 years I've been in this profession, so needless to say, I have a lot of experience and I have a lot of opinions about things. I'll try to keep my opinions down, just hopefully to educate you. So that's my expertise in being able to talk to you about this. The group that I work for, we do late pregnancy abortions. And we're going to talk a lot about that and what that means. So, moving on from there, turn the next slide. Oh yeah, we talked about the rights and the strong opinion and the misinformation, and to please be careful of what you read. In the beginning, whoops, that's one too far. In the beginning, like the very beginning, I would say since humans were on this earth, we have wanted to have control over our lives, control over our environment, control over our choices, and even our reproductive choices. I found this fascinating. In 1800 BC, they were promoting or trying to find essentially what we would consider today a diaphragm with animal dung. And I assume the donkey milk was probably like a spermicide, I'm not sure. In Genesis in the Bible, they're preaching coitus interruptus, which is the withdrawal method, which doesn't work. Next slide. We call people that use the withdrawal, in medicine, we call people that use the withdrawal method parents. So even Aristotle was preaching about spermicides. In the Romans were counseling abstinence. I thought this very interesting. Casanova in the 1700s was encouraging the use of a half of a lemon as a cervical cap. So we have cervical caps in modern medicine now. We use a cervical cap. So the fact that in the 1700s they knew they could cut a lemon in half and try to fit it up around the cervix to prevent pregnancy was remarkable. Then in 1839, Charles Goodwin vulcanized rubber, which I looked that up and it just makes it harder and more stretchy, but essentially diaphragms and condoms were born. So after that, in the 1870s, you could actually purchase forms of contraception in the form of a diaphragm or a condom. Okay? Then, lo and behold, in March of 1873, the United States Congress passed the Comstock Law, which is an anti-obscenity law, and they had instantly deemed that contraceptives or birth control were obscene, and they were made illegal. At this time in the world, the United States is the only Western nation that criminalizes birth control. And it's been going on ever since then. So that was in 1873. In 1914, Margaret Sanger came into the picture. Margaret Sanger is a person who was advocating for women, was advocating for free birth control, availability of birth control, and to make it not illegal. She wrote a paper and used the word birth control in it, was indicted with 7 indictments against the Comstock Law. Rather than face the charges, she left the country and went to England for 7 years, where she continued doing research and studying and trying to figure out how to make birth control more accessible. She came back 7 years later in 1921, I guess things had died down enough, public opinion had changed a little bit, she was not arrested, and she then went ahead to form the American Birth Control League, which eventually became Planned Parenthood Federation of America. In the 1930s, birth control was still illegal, but they were coming up with feminine hygiene products that could supposedly work as contraception. One of them was Lysol, douching. Not to mention, it did not work as a contraception, and it was very dangerous. In 1957, the FDA finally approved a medicine called Inovid, which was for menstrual disorders, and just inadvertently, it had a side effect that it stopped you from ovulating. When you don't ovulate, you don't release an egg, there's no egg to get fertilized by the sperm, so it's a form of pregnancy prevention. And ironically, in 1957, there was an unusually large number of American women who mysteriously developed menstrual disorders. And by 1959, 500,000 American women were using this Inovid for their menstrual disorder to prevent pregnancy. In 1959, I loved this, Dwight Eisenhower states in a press conference that birth control is not a proper political or government activity or function or responsibility, and adds emphatically, that is not our business. I wish we could have him come and counsel some of our politicians now. By the 1960s, the FDA finally approved contraception, a contraceptive pill. I want you to just pay attention to the doses. In a birth control pill, you're going to learn way more than you probably wanted to. When you take a birth control pill, there's 2 hormones in it, estrogen and progesterone. Those are the hormones that in a normal menstrual cycle help your cycle correctly. Well, when we give it to you in a pill, it stops you from ovulating. So it keeps the hormones at a level that you don't release the egg. So that's how it works. Well, in 1960, they did 2.5 milligrams of progesterone and 5 milligrams of estrogen. Today's doses, 1 milligram of progesterone, 30 micrograms of estrogen. 5 milligrams is 5,000 micrograms. So that's the difference in dosing. Needless to say, when the birth control pill was first brought out, there were a lot of side effects associated with it. And we've now discovered that there are actually some pills that only have 20 mics in them. So we've discovered you can still achieve what you want, stopping ovulation, with a much lower dose with much fewer side effects, of course. So the use of contraceptives or birth control, this is so obvious to me, and I would assume most of you. If you have contraceptives available for birth control, it helps prevent unintended pregnancies. And if you don't have as many unintended pregnancies, you don't have as many abortions. There was actually a study done that showed, and this was at Washington University in St. Louis in 2018, and it showed that if you can read it, it can decrease the abortion rate in their study by 62 to 78% if you just supply birth control, contraception to people. The good news is, since 2011, when the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, came into play, they've made birth control much more accessible and free. The abortion rate has dropped by about 17% since 2011. It's not only from free birth control, there's several factors. A lot of women are choosing permanent sterilization when they're done having children, having their tubes tied, or their husband's having a vasectomy. There are a lot of women that are using long-term contraception like IUDs. That's one of the most popular forms of birth control in the United States today. It is the most popular form in the world, the developed world. Because an IUD you can put in, they're good for 3 to 10 years. You don't have to do anything. So a lot of women, once they are done, think they're done having children, will use an IUD. And that's another reason we're having fewer unintended pregnancies and fewer abortions. Okay, so let's move on. Abortion history. Next slide. I found this also very interesting. The Egyptians have recorded history of abortions in 1500 BC. The next one, in early Roman Catholic Church, abortion was permitted for male fetuses in the first 40 days of pregnancy and for female fetuses in the first 80 to 90. How they knew, this is in before 1588, how they knew if it was a male or a female, I don't know. Why they chose one, I don't know that. You do know? Because they valued the men more than the women? Of course, that's probably it. In 1588, it was declared murder and outlawed. 3 years later, they got a new pope, and then it was revoked, that order, said it was okay, and it was okay for another 300 years. It wasn't until 1869 that the Catholic Church adopted the stance they have on abortion today. So needless to say, I have to say that abortions have been happening pretty much since the beginning of mankind also, just not necessarily safe abortions. Okay, we're going to talk, before we move on, I need to explain something because you're all going to be confused. Pregnancy dating is very different from a medical standpoint. We don't talk in months. So when somebody tells me months, I'm like, what does that mean? So really, there's not 28 days in a month. There's more than that, except for February. So when you're you're really going to be closer to 10 months pregnant. Don't tell any pregnant people that, they won't be happy. But we talk in terms of weeks. So 37 to 42 weeks is considered full term. On your due date, you're due on May 1st, you are 40 weeks pregnant. The way we figure that out is when someone came to me and they say I'm pregnant, the first thing I ask them is, what is the first day of your last period? So what is the first day of your last period? So it was, so let's say it was May 1st. In a normal menstrual cycle for women, 14 days after the first day of your last period, you release an egg. 14 days after you release an egg, you have a period, okay? Not everybody has an exactly 28-day cycle. Some women have, different, but just to get the idea. So 14 days after you release the egg, you have a period. Well, think about that. When someone comes in and they tell me they're pregnant and they've missed one period, they're already, from a medical standpoint, 4 weeks pregnant when they miss the first period, because we go from the first day. They probably did that. They've been doing that for the entire time I've been in this profession, because that's a solid date. Because not every woman, like I said, ovulates on day 14. So that's just the date we can go by. And even if they give you a date of May 1st, you know that it may not be right on May 1st. It could be 2 or 3 weeks before or up to 2 weeks after. So May 1st, or the first day of your last menstrual period, so you miss your first period, you're 4 weeks pregnant. Many women won't even recognize that. Not everybody pays that close of attention. Some people do, some people don't. Some people have a period once in a while, not every month. What I'm trying to get through is the next period, then they're going to notice, they're going to wait, when was that? By the time they miss a second period, they're 8 weeks pregnant. How many states in this country have bans at 6 weeks? So many women don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks pregnant. So I think that's important. So if I'm saying weeks, think about it, kind of divide by, whatever, you can figure it out on your head, but if you need to say, wait, how many months is that? I'll help you figure that out. Okay, next slide. So prior to Roe v. Wade was passed in 1973. These are just some statistics I found, and this is in one hospital in Harlem, in New York City. 1,600 women in 1 year were admitted with incomplete abortions and the complications that go with that, which include bleeding, there's still parts of placenta or whatever in there, hemorrhage, and the bigger risk, or the biggest risk, is probably infection. Because when there's products of conception left in the uterus, you get infected. If you leave it in there long enough, you get septic and you die from it. So that was in one hospital. And in 1965, they say 17% of pregnancy-related deaths were secondary to an unsafe abortion. These cannot in any way, shape be accurate, because how many unsafe abortions happen that never get reported? So these are just to give you an idea of what was happening prior to Roe v. Wade. Today, with legal abortion, risk of dying is less than 1 per 100,000. The risk of death associated with having a child, with just childbirth itself, is 14 times higher than that of having a legal abortion. That's going to be significant as we move on, so keep that in mind. So, more statistics. Worldwide, now this is worldwide, 68,000 women die of unsafe abortions annually, making it one of the leading causes of mortality worldwide. Of the women who survive unsafe abortions, 5 million will suffer long-term health complications. The legal situation of abortion in a country does not influence the abortion rate. It just makes it much more complicated and a higher risk of death. And I really found this statistic normal. Barriers to accessing safe abortion. Restrictions on abortion don't really change the number of abortions that much. It just makes them unsafe. It just makes them more deadly. So even we have all these restrictions, people are not going to stop getting abortions. They will find other ways to do it. It's just going to be unsafe, and you're going to have a lot more women dying. Okay, next slide. This is another statistic that's very sad to me. Minorities and low-income women are disproportionately affected by abortion restrictions. Multiple different reasons for that, but certainly one of them is lack of access to care, lack of transportation, distrust in the system. So when we do abortion restrictions, it's going to adversely affect minorities and low-income women. Think about it. Right now in Colorado, since Roe v. Wade was overturned, 33% of the abortions that have happened in Colorado since then have been on women from out of state. So 1/3 of the abortions we've done in Colorado have been from women from other states. Well, if you are low income and you can't afford a ticket to fly to a different state, or you live in Texas and you can't safely drive on the roads if they know you're going to have an abortion, that adversely affects lower income minorities more. Next slide. The other thing that people don't understand is, especially women of color are much more likely to die during childbirth. In fact, they're 2 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth. So much so that if you restrict abortions, then the mortality, overall mortality, will increase by 21% because of women not having abortions and going through labor. But with black women, 33% higher chance of dying if we restrict their abortion access. That's sad. Why is that? Why do black women, or especially women of color, but black mostly, why are they more likely to die during childbirth? There's a lot of research about that, but certainly low income, lack of access to care, distrust in the system. African American people have been used back in the day, even in the 60s, they did research on them without their permission. You've all probably, well, maybe you haven't, but they did a whole study on African American men, I think it was in the 60s, with syphilis. Without their consent, without them understanding that they were being used as study subjects, and they literally exposed them so they could study what would happen. And that's happened in other things with African Americans. And so there's a lot of distrust in the healthcare system with them. So they may not want to seek care. They may also have underlying health conditions because of poverty, poor nutrition, poor housing conditions. They may have high blood pressure. They may have diabetes. They may have obesity, things that can complicate pregnancy and make you higher risk, and that's part of the reason they have a 2 to 4 times higher risk of dying from childbirth. So that's something to keep in mind when we're doing abortion restrictions. Once again, it's going back prior to Roe v. Wade, it was a 2-tiered system where you had some women that had enough money, they might be able to find an actual physician that would do it for them but if you don't have money and you don't have a means, then you're going to be the ones that have to do the unsafe abortions. Okay, sorry, I get passionate. So now we're going to talk some abortion statistics. This is from 2021 from the CDC. I think this is very important, and this is where the weeks come in again, but 93.4% of abortions, and that's still true now. I mean, these statistics haven't really changed significantly in years. 93.4% are done before 13 weeks. 13 weeks is around 3 to 4 months. Closer to 4 months. 53% of those are done in the first 9 weeks because of medical abortions, and we're going to talk about that. So 93.4% are done in the first 3 months of pregnancy. 5.7 are done between 14 and 20 weeks, so that's again between 12 to, or let's see, I can't think, 4 to 5 months. And 0.9%, the late-term abortions, are done less than 1% of the time, according to this statistic. I looked up a statistic with ACOG, which is the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, and that was from 2021 also, and they said 1.1%. So somewhere around 1% of abortions are done later in pregnancy. I want to talk, before we go further into that, I want to explain some testing. So when someone comes in pregnant, they have an array of tests. You don't need to look at all of those. The ones that are most important, at least for timing, are highlighted. When they first come in, the first test we can do to check for chromosomal or any kind of other abnormalities is called a cell-free DNA. It's a blood test on the mom. It screens for trisomy 13, trisomy 18, and trisomy 21. Trisomy 13 and trisomy 18 are not compatible with life. The next test, so that test can do as early as 10 weeks, but it's not 100% accurate. It's only 86% accurate for one of them, and 97 for one, and 93 for the other. But mind you, this is someone who wants to be pregnant. They come in, we do this blood test, we get it back, and it says, oh, there might be a problem. But the next test we can't do until 11 to 13 weeks. That's 100%, that's where we check chromosomes. Most people don't choose to do this. This is actually a procedure where we go in and take a small sample of the placenta. There's a slightly higher risk of miscarriage with this test. So not very many women choose to do it because they don't want to have a miscarriage. They wanted this pregnancy and they are worried about that. So they'll wait for the next test, which isn't done until 16 to 20 weeks. An amniocentesis is where we put a needle with ultrasound guiding. We put a needle through the mom's abdomen into the uterus and withdraw a small sample of amniotic fluid to send to a lab so they can check and see if the chromosomes are normal. That test is 100%. So it takes about a week to get that test back. So now we're talking 17 weeks before we even know that, oh, this baby has trisomy 18. I think you all probably have heard about the lady in Texas that had a baby with trisomy 18 and had to leave the state to have the abortion. You know, they said because her doctor said it was high risk, or that it would put her health at risk. So I did a little more research into that. And maybe you don't want to know this, but I think it's important for you to understand. It's true, because I thought, what's going to affect her health? She had 2 prior children. She'd had both of those by C-section. To carry a baby that's not going to survive outside the womb to full term, she would have had to have another C-section. Too high of risk to have, if you've had 2 C-sections and the uterus contracts with labor, there's a risk that that C-section scar on the uterus will break open and the baby delivers into the abdomen and it's catastrophic. I mean, the baby dies, the mom can bleed to death before we can do anything. So if you've had 1 C-section, we'll let you try to labor afterwards. You've heard of a VBAC or a trial of labor. But 2, that incision is just not strong enough. So she would have had to have a 3rd C-section with her baby that was going to die. Every time you have a C-section, it increases the risk for the next pregnancy, because where that scar is on the uterus, it weakens the muscle of the uterus, makes it thinner, and then the next time she gets pregnant, as the little fertilized egg is circulating around in her uterus, that scar is kind of like Velcro. It's rough. So that's where it attaches. That's where the placenta wants to grow. Well, the uterine muscle that's normally this thick is only this thick there, and the placenta grows outside of the uterus, or it can. It's called a placental accreta. Grows outside the uterus, can attach to her bladder, can attach to her bowel, and it also can be catastrophic. We look for that in someone who's had multiple C-sections. You can't always diagnose it. I just talked to my coworker 2 nights ago, and they had an undiagnosed accreta. There's accreta, increta, percretas, depending on how far they've grown outside the uterus. She got, well, in this case, it was undiagnosed. They did do a C-section just because she hadn't progressed. Then they had this happen. It's 11 o'clock at night. Usually when we do it and we know it's there, we have a gynecologist, oncologist that's used to dealing with really tough stuff, and our high-risk doctor and an obstetrician. Well, this was just the OB and the nurse practitioner, and they got in there and saw this. And needless to say, this woman survived, and so did her baby. She had 5,000 cc blood loss. So if you've ever had an IV, like an IV bag, one of those is 1,000. So that'd be like 5 of those. So anyhow, what I'm saying, she did have a high-risk pregnancy. The lady back in Texas, if she had had a third C-section, it would have adversely affected or been very serious for her future pregnancies. So they're not lying when she says that. It's really true that that happened. And it's sad that she had to leave the state to get that. So sorry, back to my amniocentesis. So we can't do that definitively until 16 to 20 weeks. The other test that we do is called a review of systems or an ultrasound scan. So we do a review of systems between 18 and 20 weeks. The fetal organs are not developed enough until 18 to 20 weeks. So we can't see what we need to see until that age. As perinatologists, or as the group that I work for, a lot of regular OB doctors will refer to us for the review of system scan to make sure everything looks okay. So we do an ultrasound, we look for normal brain, normal heart, normal lungs, normal kidneys. We can see if it's a 3-vessel cord. We can see the valves in the heart to make sure they have all normal valves. It's remarkable what you can see. So they come in for this ultrasound. They find out the baby has no kidneys, or the baby has something called anencephaly, where part of the brain is missing. Not compatible with life. You can't live without kidneys. You can't live without half your brain. Sometimes they'll have other anomalies that, like there's something called a diaphragmatic hernia. You know, your diaphragm is what separates your abdominal contents from your chest cavity. Well, they have a hole in their diaphragm, these babies do. And sometimes the hole is so big that their entire abdominal contents get into the chest cavity, and guess what that does? It makes their heart and their lungs not develop right. Some holes are small enough we can fix them afterwards. Some of them are not. So needless to say, there's a lot of things that we can diagnose after the chromosomes are all normal. There's structural things that can still be abnormal. We can't diagnose that until 18 to 20 weeks. So they come in, they're devastated, they want a second opinion, of course, I would too. We refer them to another perinatal group. They confirm that there are these anomalies or these abnormalities or no kidneys or whatever. They're devastated. They have to then make the decision what to do. They can carry it to full term, but if they've had 2 previous C-sections, that's going to increase their risk. Maybe they had a hard pregnancy before and they're more likely to get high blood pressure. I mean, there's things associated with that. So we will honor whatever decision they make. If they decide they want to terminate at that time, then we will do that. If they decide they want to carry it to term, we will honor that also. But let's go back to the previous slide. Next one. This is significant in these statistics, if you'll think about it. So 5.7% are after or between 14 and 20 weeks. That's when we can do those chromosome tests that are 100%. 0.9% are after 20 weeks. That's because we can't do the review of systems until 18 to 20 weeks. So that's very significant. I want you to think about that because, you know, late-term abortions are so controversial and people, you know, have all these misconceptions of how they're done and why they're done. And I just want you to understand how, not 100%, I can't say 100% of abortions that are done after 20 weeks are because of that, but I can say, I couldn't find a statistic. I don't know if there is that statistic, but I can say the vast, vast, vast majority are because there's something wrong, catastrophic wrong with the baby. Okay, so let's go on to the next, again. Okay, so pregnancy termination options. This is where a lot of that misinformation comes in. And I think it's very important. Emergency contraception, the morning after pill, you may have heard of that. It's not an abortifacient, but that's why I need to tell you, it does not cause an abortion. If you have unprotected intercourse and you're not on anything for birth control, if you take this pill, we really want you to take it within 72 hours. It's more effective, but they've extended that within the first 5 days of having unprotected intercourse. It will stop or delay you from ovulating. So it'll prevent the egg from being released or postpone it by a couple of days. Sperm are only viable for about 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours. So if, you know, after 48 hours, if you take this pill, it'll keep you from releasing the egg, so you're less likely to get pregnant. It does not cause an abortion. For women sometimes that have had problems with miscarriages, we check their progesterone level in early pregnancy and give them progesterone to help maintain the pregnancy. So it does nothing to the pregnancy. Another thing we will use is an IUD. You know what that is. It's a little device they put inside the uterus that is used for contraception. Well, they found if they put it in within the first 5 days of unprotected intercourse, it causes a chemical change in the sperm and the egg and will help prevent the pregnancy. So please remember, morning after pill emergency contraception does not cause an abortion. There is a medical abortion that's done. That's the one where you take medication. It's done, has to be done in the first 10 weeks of pregnancy. If you'll remember that statistic, 53%, I found another study that said 66% are medical abortions. You can take a pill, you can get it from the doctor, you do it at home. The pill they use, you've heard of maybe RU486, it's the same as mifepristone. Mifepristone, if you know or if you've heard anything in the news, the Supreme Court is going to decide if we can keep using mifepristone because somewhere along the line somebody said we shouldn't be able to use it for this. So it is RU486, it is mifepristone, they're the same thing. We add that with another pill called misoprostol, which is a type of prostaglandin. That does cause the lining of the uterus to start degenerating. It opens the cervix a little bit, and then the misoprostol causes contractions. That is effective about 97% of the time. It needs to still have follow-up from a physician. If you get it online, you need to do a pregnancy test within 2 to 4 weeks after taking it, and if you still have a positive pregnancy test, you need to see a doctor and have an ultrasound. 97% is pretty good, but there's 3% it might not work in. So if that were to happen, then the next option would be to go to the surgical abortion. That's a D&C, dilatation and curettage, or a D&E, dilatation and evacuation. And I just am looking at that. D&C can only be done up to about 14 weeks. I messed that up. D&E can be done up to 20 weeks. That is a surgical procedure that has to be done in a facility. It can't be done after 20 weeks because the fetus is too big. So those pictures and those posters that you'll sometimes see people holding, you know, on your iPhones when you take a picture and you can blow it up so you can see it better, those pictures are not real. Those pictures look like you have a full-term baby that's been evacuated from the uterus, and that can't happen. We can't do it after 20 weeks because the fetus starts getting too big. So after 20 weeks, if like my late pregnancy terminations that we do for the baby that has no kidneys, it's an induction of labor. They have to go through labor just like anyone else does. If we can use mifepristone, if they get the mifepristone, which is the same as the RU486, we'll give that to them in the doctor's office about 36 hours before they come to the hospital. Then we will use the misoprostol, same drugs, in higher doses than you would, but you use the misoprostol, then they usually will deliver within 12 to 24 hours. If they don't get the mifepristone, we call it Miffy, if they don't get Miffy first, their labors can last 72 hours. So they're in labor, they're contracting, they're in pain, they're devastated, and it can last 72 hours. If if the Supreme Court takes that Miffy away, it's going to be that much more of a burden for women. So, okay, let's move to the next slide. I want to talk a little bit, and I get emotional about this, but the emotional toll, not on me, on the patients that have this happen. Again, remember those statistics. The 16 to 20 weeks, that's a very small percentage. A lot of them are now finding out they have a tri-13 or a tri-8 or any chromosomal abnormalities. Those are the three most common. Those are the ones we test for. But any chromosomal abnormality, some are not compatible with life. Some they may survive, but some families choose quality of life, not just quantity. They want their children to be able to not live in a wheelchair. So anyhow, that's the 16 to 20. So I'm going to talk about the late pregnancy because that's what I have the most experience with, because we are the ones that they're usually sent to when they find something wrong, and then they get the second opinion, and then they come back to us. I have had women that come in for a termination late like this that paid or did IVF. They did in vitro fertilization to get pregnant. They paid $15,000, $10,000 to $20,000, $15,000 to get pregnant. They do chromosome tests whenever they do IVF on the embryos before they even do it. So we know the chromosomes are okay, but they can't test to make sure it has kidneys, to make sure it doesn't have that hernia, those kind of things. So they come in, they're devastated. You can tell as they're walking in, it's like this walk of shame. They kind of come in because they know or they're worried that we're going to judge them. And we do a fair number of these at the hospital that I'm at right now because we are the high-risk doctors. And we get them in the room, and I try to greet them with the nurse as soon as we get there. And the first thing I say is, "I'm so sorry to meet you under these circumstances." See, I get choked up. And I say, "I support your decision," because this is a very hard decision for them. And then I explain the whole process to them of what's going to happen. I tell them they can have whatever they want for pain management. And then I explain that sometimes it takes a long time, and that a lot of times at the end it goes very fast. They they ask a lot of questions. You can see them starting to relax when they're not being judged, that they're having full support from us. We cry together. We talk about if they want to see the baby afterwards. We encourage them to see the baby afterwards. There's a lot of research that shows that it's an ambiguous loss. Back in the day, they used to just whisk them away. They thought it was too traumatic. And we've discovered that they actually do better through the grieving process if they have something tangible to hold on to. But some people, we don't make them, but sometimes we encourage that. The nurses take footprints of these babies. They take handprints. They'll take little locks of hair if they have them. We have little volunteer ladies. I shouldn't say little. We have lovely volunteer ladies that knit these cute little tiny hats for them, and we give them this whole package to take home with them so they have something tangible to hold on to. I also want to point out to you again that the same thing goes for someone who wants to go to term. Sometimes we have people who desperately want to hold a live baby. Truthfully, when they go through labor, oftentimes the baby, because it's already sick and has problems, doesn't survive the labor. The contractions of the uterus cause vasoconstriction, squeeze off of the blood vessels of the blood supply to the baby during labor. We don't monitor them. The same thing happens with a full-term baby. We don't monitor the ones that are not going to survive outside the womb during labor, because what if we're not going to do a C-section if we're term anyhow. So if we have people that are wanting to have a live baby, no matter knowing that it won't survive, and they go to term, and they're so desperately wanting to have a live baby that they will have a C-section even though they know the baby's not going to survive, if that's what their decision and their choice is, we absolutely support that. We have done C-sections and they have gotten to hold their live baby for the few hours that it lived. Oftentimes, they have to say hello before they can say goodbye. That always makes me cry too. Anyhow, it's what I want you to understand is it is not an easy decision. I can't guarantee you that all of them have those problems. I can guarantee you that every woman who has to make this decision, it's a very hard decision. I can say that maybe she's 25 years old, she has 3 kids, her husband has just been laid off, the diaphragm she was using didn't work, and she just can't emotionally, financially do it again. So that might be a situation that's true. Maybe she's 16 and had intercourse for the first time, and like most 16-year-olds don't realize that it could happen the first time. But what I'm getting at is after 40 years of doing this, I cannot think of anything other than the fact that the only person that has the right to make this decision is the woman, her partner, her family, with the help of her healthcare provider. Last slide. I was curious. I wanted to see what kind of pregnancy OB care was available in Chaffee County. There are no OBGYNs that live in Chaffee County. OBGYNs are people that specialize in pregnancy. There are some OBGYNs that come from Frisco, Swan Mountains Women's Clinic, that they are here in Buena Vista on Mondays and every other Wednesday. If you see them, you deliver in Frisco. There are no obstetricians or no family practice doctors in Buena Vista that even see pregnant patients. In Salida, there's the Highway 50 clinic where there's 6 family practice doctors that provide OB care. Some will provide the medication for medication abortions. They do not do surgical. Planned Parenthood will provide the medication. They would refer out to Denver for surgical. And the Heart of the Rockies in Buena Vista, there's some of the doctors will provide medication. They don't do surgical. The closest county you can go for a surgical abortion is Summit County. And then last but not least are my references if you want to look all of this stuff up. Thank you for listening to me. I didn't lose it too bad. Someday I was telling everyone, I did this I've done this for 40 years. I retired in 2018. And we traveled and did a bunch of traveling, and then the pandemic hit, and we couldn't travel anymore, and I was bored, and they called me in November of 2020 from the hospital there's 6 hospitals that we work out of. It's a big group, and we work out of 6 hospitals in the metro area. But they called during the pandemic. They were dying for help. There were practitioners and doctors that were sick, and I was bored, and so I went back to work in November of 2020, and I'm still commuting to Denver and working. I just can't quite give it up because I love it. The other thing I want to make sure you understand is it's not only abortions that we do. I want to tell you real quickly, are we okay on time? This will be really quick. The last shift I worked I just want you to know that this is a very small part of what we do, a very important part, but we also do amazing things. I had a patient came in with vaginal bleeding to her doctor's office, 19 weeks pregnant with twins. They put a speculum in, saw the bag of water in the vagina, flew her to my hospital. We did a bunch of testing to make sure there wasn't an infection. We take her to the operating room. We put her in Trendelenburg, which means we put her where her head's below, so it's kind of gravity helps to bring that bag of water back. Put a speculum in. We very, very gently push the bag of water back inside the uterus, pull the cervix down around it, put 2 stitches in it to hold it in. That's called a cerclage. Keep her in the hospital for a week on IV antibiotics, and then if you pray, we tell them to pray, talk to the karma gods or whatever, and we hope we can get her to viability, which is around 24 weeks. So we do amazing things. We have buttons that say we believe in miracles because there are a lot of miracles that we do. Sadly, there's other times that doesn't work out, and we still provide the same quality of care and the same compassionate care to those women also. So thank you very much.
I think we had the perfect example of an understanding and explanation of why we collectively need to think about what we do to keep decisions in the hands of people whose lives are affected rather than politicians and policymakers who are consistently and regularly trying to make those for the rest of us. So, you can go ahead. Colorado has strong laws, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit, in protecting people's reproductive freedom. But we have an opportunity this year to get a measure on the ballot that will both affirm the right to abortion in Colorado's Constitution, and it will undo the provision in the Constitution that prevents public employees and public health insurance plans from covering abortion care in their insurance plans. There's about 1 million people in Colorado that will be affected by that change. So in our thinking collectively, it is having that right without the access isn't really a right. So this is a great opportunity to affirm the right and expand access in our state. So I'm going to continue to pitch to you who are already supporting this to think about how we can all help to get this measure on the ballot and then passed in November. This is the text, if any of you haven't seen it. This text is what would go into the Constitution. The right to abortion is hereby recognized. Government shall not deny, impede, or discriminate against the exercise of that right, including prohibition of health insurance coverage for abortion. It's very straightforward. It's actually quite smart, I think, in the way it looks at that whole about having the right and access at the same time. So that's exactly what we're trying to get on the ballot and that people have the opportunity to vote for. There's a large group of organizations that work together to develop it and start this process. The overarching group is Coloradans for Protecting Reproductive Freedom, and all those organizations are part of it. And there's a growing number of endorsing organizations. You might be familiar with one of them. And even more, and this list is continuing to grow on a daily basis. So it's a fantastic show of force and collective joint appeal to move this forward in Colorado. Our first critical threshold is what we're in the middle of right now. We're collecting 185,000 signatures across the state to qualify for the ballot in November. You all have been part of this. If anyone hasn't signed it yet, I have a petition here. But this is, and then the key thing for amending the Constitution in Colorado is we need to get 2% of the registered voters in each state Senate district to sign the petition, and that's to prove that you have statewide support for the effort before you can even get it on the ballot. So Colorado has 35 state Senate districts, and you can see what those look like across the state. So there's this threshold of needing to get that set of signatures, and we're getting them turned in early April, and they'll go to the Secretary of State to be verified in mid-April. And then, I'm feeling confident about it, but we still have a lot of work to do, but feel confident about it. But then the next threshold for amending the Constitution is that in November, when it goes to a vote, it has to pass by 55%. So it's not the 50% plus one kind of thing, where you really need to show that there is support for amending the Constitution. So just wanted to touch briefly on as I said, Colorado does have some good laws in place, and people often, when I've asked them to sign, have said, well, what's the problem? We're good here. We do have a strong statutory framework to build on. We have the Reproductive Health Equity Act, that every individual has the fundamental right to use or refuse contraception. Every pregnant individual has a fundamental right to continue the pregnancy and give birth or to have an abortion. And a fertilized egg, embryo, or fetus does not have independent or derivative rights under the laws of the state. That's in statute. That's law in this state. But, well, I won't get to the but yet. Our large employer health insurance companies are currently, starting in 2025, required to cover abortion care in all their private health insurance. And small and medium ones will be as well, as long as there's a little bit of state money attached to that unless we make this change to the Constitution, some of them will not, the law won't apply to them. But there is a private insurance requirement to cover abortion care. I'm sorry, yeah. How do you define small, medium versus? It's all in state law. It's 50 or more, I can't remember the number. Yeah, it's the number of employees. Go ahead. There's a shield law that protects people who travel to Colorado for abortion or gender-affirming care, which Kim was talking about it, as our number of abortions in Colorado have actually increased because of people traveling from out of state where they have terrible restrictions. But our state law protects that. We have a new law that crisis pregnancy centers are prohibited from false and deceptive advertising, which is a good step forward. There's also a federal regulation that hospitals are required to provide stabilizing care, including abortion, to patients in medical emergencies. So that this constitutional amendment sort of builds from that commitment that the state has already made. But the Initiative 89 will help to reduce the threats that we know are out there to these measures. In 2020, we defeated in the state, there was an effort to have a 22-week abortion ban, which lost by 18%, which is pretty solid. But prior to that, we've defeated 3 other times. Did I just blow it out? I don't know. Maybe it died. Anyway, so there's been a consistent, voters have rejected that kind of ban on other occasions as well. But that doesn't stop people from attempting to do things that limit access to abortion care in Colorado. Just a week ago today, the legislature considered and defeated a personhood bill which would have both banned IVF treatment and abortion in Colorado. That was last week, so they keep coming. And then currently, in addition to this ballot measure that we're working on to affirm the right to abortion, there are also petitions being circulated to get a measure on the ballot to ban abortion in Colorado and several forms of birth control as well. And it would allow prosecution of medical professionals, as well. So that when people are talking about why do we need this, we need it because we need the highest affirming bar possible, which then prevents a lot of these things. Because if it's in the Constitution that this is a right, these become more and more invalid. And I will just, in some of the Kim kind of touched on these, but we saw after the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe and pushed all these decisions back to the state, and we're taking those decision-making powers and running with it. You know, we've seen a 500% increase in patients from Texas, and not only Texas, but the bulk of abortion patients that are having to deal with these decisions, deal with whatever they're dealing with, and then figure out how to get to Colorado, how to find a healthcare provider in a place they don't know, leave their own healthcare provider. It's insanity, but it is a way that we can remain sort of in this network of a little bit of a safe haven in a part of the country that doesn't have as good of access as we all do. I volunteer, as I said, with Coloradans for Reproductive Freedom, for protecting reproductive freedom. Its members, the Cobalt Abortion Fund being one of them, raises a lot of money to help offset the expenses of people having to do that. But that's kind of a ridiculous thing to do too, that we have to, I mean, people are doing it willingly, but it's a tough go to consider raising out of pocket for people's healthcare needs. So I invite you to redouble your efforts to get this measure on the ballot. We have a big 1-month push ahead of us. If anybody wants to be trained or find out how to get trained to do it, please let me know. We're gonna have a number of y'all come kind of signing events coming up in Leadville, BV, Poncha, Salida, and we'll keep pushing that information out. And the more you can help push out to other networks that you have both here and honestly anywhere in the state, because we need all those signatures from across the way, it would be fantastic. So I'm going to wrap up there.
Sorry about the mic. So there's going to be an event at Tres Litros. There's a brochure here about a signing. The key thing about getting these petitions signed is all of you need to reach out to your book club, whatever networks of people, friends you have, and ask them to email. There's some information on our website about how they can find about sign-up events or how they can do their own. How you
The proposed constitutional change language is absent any language that says this is a woman's right. Is there a risk that someone could claim the right contrary to what the program the pregnant mother may deserve? I'm not sure I understand this. There's nothing in the language, Grace, or that says.
Yeah, sorry. So the language says it establishes the right, but it doesn't say who the right belongs to. And my concern, I work in domestic violence and sexual assault. So my concern is that, and this is not unusual, an abusive husband will force someone to have a pregnancy that doesn't want one, or to do the opposite, right? Force an abortion while the carrying mother would rather carry the child to term. I just noticed it, and I thought, is there a problem that it doesn't say who that right belongs to? Because if somebody else wants to exercise the right, it could be against the wishes of the woman.
I honestly don't know the answer to that. I wish I did. It's an interesting question. I guess I inherently thought it went to the person who was pregnant, had the right. But I mean, that's how I keep reading it, but I don't have enough of a legal background, honestly, to know. That's a great point. I'll try and find out more. And no, I mean, you want to prevent against what you're concerned about, so.
Yeah, in other words, if the father contests against what the woman does, or their grandparents, I get you. Is there any estimate of signatures obtained as of today?
Yes, we are about, my understanding is we're 110,000 maybe in hand. But there are scores, there's over 900 people trained in the state, volunteers out in the state collecting signatures. There's scores of petitions out there. I mean, I can see the spreadsheet of how many petitions are out being circulated. So the potential for lots of those are out there. But again, the more people find out that they know they can come somewhere and sign it or be encouraged to sign it is a great way to get those signature lines filled in.
Go ahead, Carol.
What happens if one Senate district does not get that 2%? Does that negate the whole row?
That's correct. It must be 2% of the people who
Voted in the last election in the Secretary of State's. Wendy?
Just with perspective to the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, once this passes, can this be appealed and go to the Supreme Court and it's undone?
No, there's no, I mean, I'm going to say this, I believe this is correct, and again, but the Dobbs decision pushed the decisions to the states. So they wouldn't have the constitutional ground to overturn a constitutional amendment. If at the national level the law changes, it could be challenged. But this is as good and tight a protection as there can be in the current legal framework.
So if the legislature changes, could they go through the signature process and change this?
Sure, I mean, anybody could go through, it's not a small endeavor.
No,
I think so it's a lot different than just having a legislature meet and pass a law that would, when we win in November, would become unconstitutional. Changing the Constitution's a heavy lift, and we'll see. I mean, this other effort is underway right now to have an abortion ban in the Constitution, so we'll see if they get their signatures and show up as well. Could be a very interesting ballot if we're both on it. It really shows you where you are.
So does anybody know where we are in our Senate district? Should we be up in Lakewood? Should we be in Fairplay? We've been hitting Chaffee County hard, but if that's something we need to do, let me
there are percolating things happening, yes, but great, you know, working on organizing things in Fremont, in Park, and been up in Leadville. There are groups doing things, so yes, we'll continue to share those, and if we need volunteers to cover some of those events, we know where to come in this room, but also, again, encouraging to the extent that you can, people that you know in those places, and I was just in Yuma County on Saturday collecting signatures, so we'll happily take anybody you know on the Eastern Plains and encourage them to sign a petition. Yes, we'll loop you in, let you know all of them, because that, you know, it is the last big push.
And we have people in Leadville. We will put a link on our website, you know how you can help. That if you have friends in the San Luis Valley, we've got signature people down there who came up to us and got trained, you know, but we might need people to go to other places and carry signatures, but it's easy to get trained, 10 minutes online from anywhere. You don't have to live in Chaffey County to sign the petition. Anybody from anywhere in the state can sign your petition. I carry mine everywhere I go. So check on the website, and I'll try to do some work in the next day or so to make it easy for you to find out how and where to go. And the state has a website, and on our calendar, all the petition training is listed on the calendar that the State League is doing in collaboration with Coloradans for Reproductive Freedom.
So one more question, who's in Canyon City?
She went to the Fremont Democratic Caucus. We've got some people. If you know people in other counties that are in our Senate district or whatever, send them to me and we'll get them to Ellen, please. Rose?
Is there some kind of like a tally that you can look to see, like how are we doing?
Last I heard that we were 55% in our state Senate district. Is that correct?
Turned in. I mean, this is I mean, it's hard to put those numbers out because they change constantly. I mean, I just got handed another filled-in petition right now that I'm delivering tomorrow. So it's hard to know. We're doing solidly, but we need that last big push. And there will be, by having the earlier deadline of early in April before we need to turn those in mid-April, it gives us a little bit of time to go fill the gaps that need to be filled from specific districts. But as I said, if we encourage people who have petitions to work on getting those filled and getting them turned in, is the sooner we get them, the better we know.
I just wanted to thank Cobalt and thank the League of Women Voters for pushing this out, because it's a lot of work and I've watched you guys, so thank